Hello again, this is Eddie Muller. I hope you enjoyed your summer under the stars and you're ready to step back into the coolness of the shadows here in Noir Alley. We kick off the fall season by answering those fans who requested a wee drame of British noir. Today's film is Cloudburst, a fascinating post-war thriller from London's venerable Hammer Studios. It was made in 1951, several years before the studio became synonymous with gothic and graphic remakes of American horror movies of the 30s. Cloudburst stars American actor Robert Preston as a World War II cryptologist, a specialist in creating and deciphering coded messages. In the post-war years, as England was trying to build back its movie industry, it was common for British productions to cast American actors as a way of enhancing their films' chances in the U.S. market. Now, this was after Great Britain had imposed onerous taxation on American studios in England, causing a trade war that lasted a few years. In the late 40s, talent and money once again started flowing both ways. A few American actors revived their careers in England, such as Carol Landis, Alexis Smith, and Robert Preston, although none of them dared attempt a British accent. That's why in this film, Preston's character is a transplanted Canadian. Now, plenty of noir films made in America used World War II veterans as characters, usually depicting them either as alienated loners or victims of amnesia. Cloudburst takes a different approach. It shows men who have re-assimilated precariously into civilian life. The skills they learned to battle the Nazis, whether it was code cracking or bone breaking, are still percolating just beneath the surface, waiting to be summoned for virtuous reasons or righteous vengeance. Since this film is fairly obscure, I don't want to say too much about the plot. There are some jolts that come out of the blue, and those can be spoiled by describing the motivations of Preston's character, Colonel John Graham. I will say that he shares a unique relationship with his wife, Carol, played by Elizabeth Sellers. Their bond was forged in a German prisoner of war camp, with love letters tapped out in code on the prison walls.
Do you remember that?
Well, this one-of-a-kind setup was the work of writer Leo Marx, who was himself a cryptologist for the British during the World War. He developed a passion for codes and ciphers growing up in his father's bookstore on Charing Cross Road. But when he was conscripted, the military felt he was too much of a misfit for the regular code-breaking unit. He was assigned to head up the SOE, Special Operations Executive, which was described as a mix of geniuses and bungling amateurs. Marx became responsible for deploying agents behind enemy lines after teaching them to communicate with the Home Office through complex ciphers. Often the key words in his ciphers were based on original poems he'd write, making it virtually impossible for the enemy to crack. But this was no game. Agents carried cyanide pills to commit suicide in case of capture, and Marx noted that as many as 50 agents, men and women, died under his command and service to the SOE. Marx funneled all of this background into the script of Cloudburst, which honestly should be called the key word, or cipher, since much of its intrigue comes from the arcane art of cryptology. But don't think this is some sort of John le Carré spy story. Once a major plot twist happens, it becomes hardcore noir, ruthless and brutal, despite the polite manners and stiff upper lips. Directed with some great stylistic flourishes by Hammer workhorse Francis Searle and featuring a few supporting players familiar to fans of Hammer's later horror shows, here is Robert Preston, a long way from River City, starring in Cloudburst. There are a few puzzles in the script of Cloudburst I still haven't been able to decode. But despite that, I love this story. It manages to work on multiple levels, as a remembrance of wartime espionage, as a revenge-based film noir, and as a tragic romance, all in a brisk 83 minutes. And the ending couldn't be more perfect or more British. It's a rare instance in a noir of the law finally getting its man, but without any feeble attempt to balance the moral scales or tidy things up with false hope. Colonel Graham has gotten his revenge, and it ends up meaning virtually nothing. Writer Leo Marx wouldn't write another screenplay until 1960, one that was the blueprint for the most controversial film ever made in England, Peeping Tom, about a photographer who moonlights as a serial killer and his obsession with photographing the faces of his victims at the moment of their death. The streak of cruel vengeance that runs through Cloudburst runs amok in Peeping Tom. The film's unflinching take on voyeurism and psychopathy so angered critics the film almost ended the career of its celebrated director, Michael Powell. It's ironic how that works. A similar movie, Psycho, released the same year in the United States, made its director a multimillionaire. Peeping Tom ruined Michael Powell's reputation and left him begging for work in television. A new generation of filmmakers, however, praised Peeping Tom for being just as innovative as Psycho and even more disturbing. Martin Scorsese led the campaign to rehabilitate Powell's reputation, which the director surely appreciated. But no more than Scorsese introducing him to his longtime editor, Thelma Schoonmaker, whom Michael Powell married in 1984. Scorsese's admiration extended to Leo Marx as well. He paid the writer cheeky tribute by having him provide the voice of the devil in his 1988 film, The Last Temptation of Christ. Well, if you're intrigued by the art of cryptography, I recommend Marx's memoir of his wartime experiences, Between Silk and Cyanide. He wrote it in the early 1980s, but its scathing critique of Britain's wartime practices led to the government preventing its publication until 1998, 3 years before Marx's death. One of the puzzlers in Marx's script for Cloudburst is how long it takes Inspector Davis to realize that Colonel Graham's wife was the victim of a hit and run. Given how everyone knows of Graham's wartime exploits, you'd think the death of his wife would have been news. Colin Tapley, who played the inspector, was actually a New Zealander who'd worked most of his career in Hollywood. After being one of the winners in Paramount's 1934 publicity stunt of a movie, Search for Beauty. He appeared in plenty of Hollywood pictures after that, including The Lives of a Bengal Lancer, Becky Sharp, and The Light That Failed. After enlisting in the Royal Air Force during the war, he stayed in England to resume his acting career. Now, as for Elizabeth Sellers, she makes quite an impression in her brief appearance, with her unusual mouth, odd line readings, and a pronounced limp that's only explained later in one of the movie's most intense scenes. The photographs of her displayed throughout the movie actually got more screen time. Sellers was Scottish, born in Glasgow, and she had every intention of being a barrister until on a lark she auditioned for the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. She was mostly indifferent about her acting career, although while briefly in Hollywood, she was cast as Humphrey Bogart's wife in The Barefoot Contessa. I hope to arrange her return to Noir Alley in the 1960 thriller Never Let Go, which features a rare villainous role for Peter Sellers. No relation. Next week, however, we will be back on American soil for a nifty little noir written by Blake Edwards and directed by Richard Quine. Mickey Rooney plays a sad sack seduced into being the wheelman for a heist and Drive a Crooked Road. In the meantime, head over to the Noir Alley Facebook page or Twitter feed and see if you can decode the secret message I just left there. See you next week.